Welcome everyone to this launch of the Livery Climate Action Group's website and the launch of the network of livery companies who want to actively engage in this topic, climate change. And of course, that is all of the livery companies. Now, you know me, I'm Professor Michael Mainelli. I'm one of the aldermen of the City of London, and I've been long in the tooth in the environmental and climate change movement since the 1970s, creating things such as the Green Finance Index. But one of the things I find interesting is the City of London is even deeper in it. It was in 1952 that we had the Great Smog, and the City of London created in 1953 the first Clean Air Act, leading to the National Clean Air Acts in '56. Jumping forward, it was in 1999 that the City of London started creating the carbon markets. And of course, my fellow Alderman Alison Gowman and our dear departed Alderman Roger Gifford have been doing tremendous work with the Green Finance Initiative, now the Green Finance Institute. So I'm absolutely delighted that Livery have embraced this challenge with such enthusiasm. And I'm going to hand over to my fellow Alderman Alison Gowman, who is Sheriff this year and has been leading the work since the start of this year. Alison, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Michael. It's fantastic to have you part of this. And thank you very much. Can I add my welcome to everybody? We've had 400 people plus sign up to this seminar, and quite a few of you have already managed to get on. So welcome. As you said, this project around the livery and their response to climate action started back in January 2021, when I thought that we really needed to hold a seminar with the livery in response to the City Corporation's climate action strategy, and to gauge the interest of livery companies and the appetite for them about this topic. I didn't really expect there to be so much enthusiasm, nor was I aware quite how much was already actually happening in very many livery companies. And we've been able to build on that. And it's fantastic to see how many people are working both in their own operations, but with their own trade, professions and crafts. There's a lot of activity going on. I sort of wonder maybe with the pandemic that perhaps we all became a little bit more introspective, thoughtful. Perhaps this allowed us to actually really review and explore online and in discussion some of the pressing issues of our age. And it's clear that there's an appetite and a body of work within the livery now ready to issue consideration around climate and environmental, social and governmental issues. And whether that's about our investments or whether it's about our trade or profession, there's an awful lot of information and knowledge we can tap into. So since that seminar 9 months ago, we've progressed to really a full-blown program of engagement and a host of activity. And our offer now is to livery companies to show specific guidance notes, template action plans, ideas for engaging with our professions, but also with our schools and with our affiliates. All of them are hosted on our brand new website, which you're just going to hear about in a few minutes. Our purpose is to inform and facilitate, and where we can, collaborate and share ideas. And you'll see in the website in this next session how you can explore it and what there is there. You'll see that this is something for you as individuals, as groups, as livery companies to join. And I would urge you to think about that. There is a button on the website that you're on the REMO platform. If you want to find out more, please press it. Please leave your details to get involved. But thank you for now, and I'll hand back to Michael.
Well, thank you, Alison. It's nice to have a warm-up, and I'm thrilled as well that not only are we just having an event which I was kindly asked to MC, but we're having an event on a new software, REMO, with the immense help of telepresence and Ian Beveridge and his team. So there's going to be an opportunity to network. Of course, before we do so, we want to turn briefly to an important bit of technology that both of us have mentioned, and that's very much that immediate past master engineer, Gordon Masterton, and his colleague, the liveryman of the Chartered Surveyors, John Pike, are going to tell us all about the new website. So Gordon, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much indeed, Michael. Good evening, everyone. I'm Gordon Masterton, Chair of Future Infrastructure at the University of Edinburgh as my day job, and immediate past master of the Worshipful Company of Engineers. It's my pleasure to be asked to chair the very first online livery seminar on the City of London Corporation's climate action strategy last year, and to introduce Alderman Alison Gowman at that event. And volunteers arising from that seminar were later to become the Livery Climate Action Group, which I think will be one of the most important and relevant pan-livery networks for the years to come. But I would say that, I suppose. The group's ethos is, since livery companies are stakeholders in the square mile, we should want to do our bit to contribute towards the city's objectives, whatever they may be. What's more, the objectives set out in the climate action strategy arguably deal with the biggest existential threats that we collectively face. Early on in the forward planning, a website was identified as the most effective vehicle for promoting the practical measures that livery companies can consider and for sharing helpful information on each company's progress towards net zero greenhouse gas emissions for the city's full value chain by 2040. That's probably the most challenging goal set by the city in that excellent strategy document. And I'm delighted to say that the website is live today and available to explore. We may even see a sample of it as I speak. I won't be taking you through every page, however. That's good news. That's for you to do later, I hope. But I do want, with the help of my colleague John Pike, who you'll hear from shortly, to introduce you to the broad content that is there so far. And I say so far because we've got a pipeline of material under preparation, and that'll be added progressively. And we intend to ensure that the site's kept up to date and topical with guidance that's genuinely practical for livery companies to consider and for them to adopt or adapt to suit their particular circumstances. But by joining the Livery Climate Action Group, companies will be able to influence what material goes onto the site in the future and to be fully participating in the next generations of the website. Our approach to date has been to seek volunteers across the livery to champion the writing of guidance notes focused on the actions that companies should be considering for contributing to climate resilience, adaptation, and the net zero emissions goal. Our first guidance note to be completed was a note by the investment group on environmental, social and governance investment principles, one of the areas that all companies are likely to find information relevant for their own investment strategy. And because there were a variety of authors across the full suite of guidance notes, we recognized the need for a common approach to writing style and formatting, and Edwina Morton and Liz Thursell have done a sterling job on that aspect and more. And as an extra piece of validation, the UCRIC group of universities, that's a collaboratorium of the leading UK researchers in infrastructure and cities, they've provided a fact-checking exercise on the property guidance notes in particular. And finally, but probably the most important of all, John Clink, clerk of the Merchant Tailors, provided a critical clerk's perspective of the content to keep the notes grounded, relevant, and pragmatic for livery companies. So it's been as inclusive an exercise as we could make it. And we've done our best to be as relevant, topical, and accurate as we can be, accepting that the whole field is also very fast moving. Research is developing and practice is developing. And it will change and be updated pretty much constantly as new information comes to light. In summary, we want this website to be seen as the go-to place for information, help, and guidance for all livery companies interested in helping the city deliver its climate action strategy. I'll now hand over to John Pike, who led the team that focused on property-related actions, a group that proved to be highly prolific in producing a series of notes prepared with hall-owning companies in mind, but also highly relevant for companies who are tenants in halls. John, can I hand over to you now?
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you for your very comprehensive introduction. For those of you who don't know me, my name is John Pike. I'm a chartered surveyor and a member of the Chartered Surveyors Livery Company. Earlier this year, I was asked by the Livery Climate Action Group, led by Alderman to lead a small group of members of the Livery from across a wide spectrum of livery companies to write and publish guidance notes which would assist livery companies to support the climate aims of the City of London. These aims are to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions in the square mile by 2040, alongside greater climate resilience of city buildings, public spaces and infrastructure. The results of these efforts can be seen today with the launch of the Action Group's website, and our papers are listed on that website. I will give you an insight as to what the published guidance notes contain, for some idea of the guidance notes that we intend to produce in the future. I have to say none of this would have been possible without the tireless dedication of the author of the various papers, and also the organisation and knowledge of Liz Trussell, who's already been mentioned by Gordon, as well as our very own editor-in-chief, hot from The Economist, Edwina Morton. So we've had a great team, and I think we've produced really excellent papers, I have to say, but credit to everybody who's contributed and is contributing to papers which will be produced in the future. But first, the background. Our launch is very timely with COP26 only a few weeks away. It's generally accepted that we have 10 years to make changes if we are to limit global warming to at least 2 degrees and hopefully 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. But I remain very optimistic. I don't know whether many of you saw last night the first Earthshot Prize on TV, and there's an incredibly wide-ranging number of environmental projects underway. I read today, and I think also interestingly, I read today that the International Energy Agency, long aligned with the fossil fuel industry, has issued a report saying the message is clear: a new global energy economy is coming, which is cheaper, cleaner, safer, more resilient, and much fairer across countries. So change is upon us. I suggest who will be buying new internal combustion engine cars in 5 years' time, maybe only 3 years' time. So the livery companies must play their part. And you'll see here on the screen the introduction, which is part of the guidance notes. Key to me, as I say in this introduction, is the elimination of CO2 from our buildings and activities, along with Scope 1 emissions, direct emissions, and Scope 2 emissions, indirect emissions from things such as energy that we buy. There will also be a time, and I think a time coming sooner rather than later, when owners and occupiers of buildings will also have to take responsibility for Scope 3 emissions, that is indirect emissions occurring in their value chain. By this we mean the suppliers to delivery companies. You will have to make certain that they too comply with the city's aims and objectives. To date, the guidance notes uploaded so far are as follows, and I think we're having there some of the paper and just giving an outline of the papers. As you can see, we have ESG investment, which is how to manage stocks and shares in a sustainable way in accordance with environmental, social and governance principles. Heritage and listed buildings is the first property paper. The most sustainable building is the one that already exists. And I take from that, i.e. don't knock them down unless you really have to. But our heritage buildings will be vulnerable because of their age to risks such as increased rainfall, higher winds and warmer temperatures. So how can livery companies defend their buildings against these risks? The paper contains some ideas on how to do that. Energy is going to be critical as we move forward now. Saving energy means saving on greenhouse gases. It's that simple. Save energy, you save on the gases. The best time to start thinking about energy savings is right now. This guidance note explains how buildings can be assessed for ways to reduce energy demand and improve efficiency. It also introduces the responsible retrofit wheel, which is really worthwhile having a look at if you get the chance. Another paper is information technology. Work patterns are changing and technology is evolving fast, and information technology is going to be at the heart of our move to a net zero economy. We can now manage energy consumption and building management systems digitally. You'll also see here some quick smart technology wins, and we wanted to put in our papers And it's not only about the expense of introducing new technology, for instance, it's also what can you do easily and quickly without great cost. And all our papers contain some ideas on that. The next paper is solid waste management. 70% of office waste is recyclable. And this paper introduces the reader to RAP, which is a waste and resource action program, which will enable you to actually save on office waste and recycle it wherever possible. The circular economy is a further paper of ours, and you can sort of really, one can understand why this is now absolutely critical. Plastic goes into our seas and rivers. A third of all food produced rots away in landfill. Delivery companies need to think very carefully about how they tackle these problems. And the paper expands on the 7 R's of the circular economy. I won't go into the 7 R's now, but it's really worthwhile reading the paper to find out what they are. The penultimate paper we have is the value of green spaces. There are 2 planetary emergencies, actually, aren't there? One is the climate change problem, and the other is biodiversity. It's recognised as an issue in parallel with climate change. This guidance note sets out how plants can make a major contribution to the ecosystem and also support mental health. And I would sort of, suggest that livery companies look closely at this paper, just because there's not a lot of green around the buildings and so on. There's a lot you can do in your own livery company, plant boxes in the livery companies and so on. And finally, the paper is water and waste management. And there are many ways a livery company can save water. And the guidance note provides advice on how they can reduce water consumption and become more efficient in managing wastewater. We also have managed to upload a very useful property glossary. Many of the terms are there, which are common in the world of sustainability, but maybe not common to everybody's knowledge. So that is worth reading. Coming up on track are guidance papers on transport, air quality, heating and ventilation, procurement of materials, and financing energy schemes. So there's a lot more to come, and I hope between now and probably Christmas we'll get most of these papers uploaded. There is actually then the question of obviously keeping them valid, keeping them up to date, and there may be other papers that we actually want to also include. So I would say to anybody listening, if you want to join our small team of experts in all these different aspects of sustainability, please do probably best contact Alison in the first instance, and she can introduce you to me, and we can see where we might be able to sort of fit you in, which I think would be very useful, because there's a very small team at the moment and we probably need a few more people. Just so I can elaborate a bit more on how the papers are arranged, I've just put up on the screen there, you can see solid waste management, zero waste. And here we talk about, and most of the papers follow this kind of standard, the city's requirement for disposing of commercial waste sustainability, companies that comply with the city requirements for waste disposal, i.e. which companies can you rely on to dispose of waste in line with the city's requirements, how to recycle hard to recycle items such as crisp packets and so on, the Clean City Award scheme, which is well worth, I think actually, I can't remember the name of the company now, but one of the livery companies has actually won that in the past. There's an introduction to RAP, which is the Waste and Resource Actions Programme, an easy guide on how to introduce effective recycling and waste reduction. All our papers highlight organisations which can help with a particular aspect of sustainability and often list quick wins, such as in the energy paper, which is say quick wins are cheap wins. It has to be said that these are just guidance papers. None of the papers are a substitute for commissioning professional advice. They merely act as guidance as to what the challenges are and where the solutions might be found. As a guide, hopefully they provide a roadmap to livery companies playing their part in achieving a better and sustainable world. And I just repeat, anybody who wants to help with the production of these papers, please do get in touch. So thank you for that, and I now hand back to Gordon.
Well, thank you very much indeed, John. That's given viewers a tempting taster of what they will find in the website, whether hall owners or tenants. There's something for everyone there. I'd also like to draw your attention to another piece of invaluable guidance, if Ian can continue with the screen sharing. It's an exemplar climate action plan, and the Water Conservators have prepared this, and it's based on the template that the Livery Climate Action Group has been developing for Livery Company climate action plans. So the very first, that's not quite it, Ian, it's the climate action plan, if you can find it. If not, people can find it online. So the very first climate action plan has been prepared by the Water Conservator. That's it. Thank you, Ian. This is tremendous. And this is the Water Conservators, of course, are a nomadic company. So you don't have to be a whole-owning company to make a meaningful contribution to climate action and to net zero. Also on the website, we have a selection of short videos to describe what a few companies are doing already in addressing climate change, and a sample of those are already on the website for you to view at your leisure. And finally, under the What You Can Do Now tab, there's an excellent set of PowerPoint slides from the Education and Outreach group that address 20 thought-provoking questions. And now those are the sort of questions, the very ones that you're likely to get from smart, savvy school students if you're visiting as a Livery your schools that you're affiliated with. And a super set of PowerPoint slides against each of the 20 questions. So there's something in there for everyone, I believe. I'd like to close with a reminder of what Alison said. We've done the work so far with the companies who volunteered after the first seminar. It was actually January this year, time flies. For the benefits of the Livery working together to be fully realised, we would like to expand the group significantly and to have all Livery companies who share this common interest to sign up for membership of the Livery Climate Action Group. It's free of charge and only requires an email to be sent to the address which is now visible in the chat, or will be very, very shortly, or just click the link exploring the bottom right of your screen to contact Livery Climate Action Group. This will then trigger an invitation for you to join the group, allowing you to participate in the future development of guidance and lessons learned, and to play an active part in building the group into a fully inclusive network, adding value to everybody, with all members being helped and encouraged to write their own climate action plan, as the Water Conservators have already done. I guess our key success indicator is the number of Livery companies that have written their own plans. So please do click the link or email us, adding your interest or where you can help, and all will be made welcome. Thank you very much. Back to Michael.
Well, thank you, Gordon and John. A wonderful presentation. You've achieved a heck of a lot in a very short space of time with that website. It's got a tremendous amount of resources there. I think that all the companies, whole owning or not, stand to get a great deal from sharing knowledge and experience, which is part of it. But as you say, working together, and I would encourage everyone to lodge your interest in joining the network. Now, we are using some fun technology, REMO, as I said, thanks to Ian Beveridge and his team. We're going to go back to some networking rooms where you started initially for a short networking session. This will be just under 15 minutes. There are some themed tables and some unlabeled tables. We don't want to force you to do anything you don't want. There's a limit to each table, but you can move around and swap tables. Once you're at a table, you can engage with the others there. And remember, the tables are spread out over floors 1, 2, and 3. So you can move between floors by using the lift on the left when in the room. And we'll see you back here shortly for the plenary session, which will start automatically in 15 minutes. So enjoy, network, and then we'll come back for a plenary discussion. Thank you. Well, welcome back, everybody, to the plenary session. I hope that you were able to explore a few of the topics with each other. I got around a few of the tables, and it seemed to be going well. And if I could ask my colleagues on the plenary panel session to join me up here. First, we have Martin Gettings, who's the Group Director of Sustainability at Canary Wharf Group. Obviously, a very interesting thing from a city perspective to hear how it's done in a modern environment or more modern environment. We have Christina Gamboa, who's the CEO of the World Green Building Council. We have Professor Avril McDonald, OBE, from Reading University, and of course, immediate past master fueler, and Kevin Hydes, the constructor at Liveryman from Integral Group. So what I'm going to do, if I may, is I'm going to ask each of our 4 speakers to introduce themselves very briefly, but so people can have an idea where you're coming from, say a few words about their interests and aims. Then I've got a question for each, and we'll move open into the plenary session, which will be ending sharply in 15 minutes. So please do be quite curt. So Martin, you're first.
Thanks very much, Michael. Hi, everybody. Delighted to be here this evening. And I know we have to keep this really short, so I'll try and break the habit of a lifetime and do that. My name's Martin Gettings. I'm Director of Sustainability here at Canary Wharf Group. I also have a role in Brookfield Asset Management, where I'm the head of ESG for Europe, and I'm taking on that as a full-time role in the new year. I'm very proud to say that I am a constructor, and one of my roles is to chair the Constructors Climate Action Group. And through that, we have made sure that we've got members and constructors working in just about all of the working groups across this initiative. I also chair a number of industry working groups and initiatives. One of them that's worth mentioning is Supply Chain Sustainability School. And we were talking in one of our breakout sessions that really that is one of the next frontiers of sustainability, our supply chain. So I'd like you all to sort of hold that thought. Why am I involved in all of these things? Well, because I believe that to drive change, we simply must participate and contribute. And I actually think that the built environment is something that connects us all in whatever walk of life we're in. We're all actors and participants in the built environment. So I see the built environment as something that is a real enabler and an opportunity for sustainability and climate action as well. And I think importantly, what we have to think about as Livery members is not what we do within our various companies. That's important as well. But I would urge us to think about what can we do within our sphere of influence with our industry contacts and our industry networks, because I think that is an area that we can have a lot of positive impact. So that's me, that's my story, and that's why I'm here. Thank you, Mike.
Excellent, Martin. Christina, a bit on your background and then a point or two.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Cristina Gamboa. Yes, from the World Green Building Council. I represent a network of 72 national green building councils, including the UK GBC. So I'm taking globally the ambitions of this group that you've discussed in those action plans. And basically what I've been doing in the past 10 months is advocating and shaping up with the UK government and the high-level climate champions, cities, regions, and built environment day at COP26, November 11th, curating that. And we're going to be announcing more signatories to our flagship program, the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment, that now is tackling whole life carbon. So it's including the scope 3s that we're going to talk about, and 2 key initiatives. At a European level, we have a framework for renovation that 30 cities have engaged with. So I'll share more in the chat box, but basically it's how to tackle experiences between cities and share best practice to accelerate renovation of buildings to get them to whole life net zero. And of course, another key one, which is delivering roadmaps for decarbonization for the built environment. I am as passionate as Martin and Kevin and all of this in this call, because it is a critical climate solution. Worldwide, the built environment represents at least 40% of greenhouse gas emissions related to the consumption of energy. So it's energy efficiency first, of course, electrification, but also addressing the indirect influence that the built environment has and tackling all those indirect emissions and getting businesses, cities to be more transparent and more ambitious. So happy to be here.
Super, Christina. And just a reminder to all 4 of you panelists, please feel free to stick links in the chat room. If I could, Avro, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Pastmaster Fuller, and our emphasis is very much energy. We started out as woodmongers, but we have now moved into future energy. We have a strong influence on the future energy of the whole of the environment. And if anyone's interested in our future energy conference directly after COP26, please check out the website. But it's not just what we do at our generation. I think another element that we need to influence is the younger generation, and the work that we as companies do with schools and other organizations in training is essential. If we don't get the younger generation to be studying the science, technology and engineering and maths that will lead them into this world, then we really are not doing our part. I was asked if I could put in my statement to provoke a few questions. Clearly, I'm interested in education, but I think my statement from an energy perspective is energy has been far too cheap for far too long. We have to grasp the nettle and realize this is going to cost a lot of money to make the transition. And unless we're honest about that, we will never make the progress we need to make. Get it to be more expensive and get that investment in. Thank you.
That is really kind and to the point, Avril. And Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Kevin Hides. I'm an engineer. I'm actually a livery member with the constructors also with Martin. To me, it's, you know, I look back even in my career, in the 70s, we talked about energy efficiency after the OPEC oil crisis in the mid 70s. We then moved on to talking about net zero energy for a number of years, and designed and built great examples like Bedzed in the south of London was the first ever commercial building to attain that level of performance. And now we're talking about carbon, and we're talking about a whole life carbon, not just operational carbon. And I think it was said earlier by opening speakers that the most carbon savvy building we can live in is the one we've already built. So I think retention of our existing buildings is a big issue. I'll be brief with my sort of statement of a challenge. I think early on one of the tables we were talking about decarbonization of heating, and one of the comments you made, Michael, was the elasticity of the pricing. That nobody can really quite pin down the price or the performance, and I think it's essential that we get transparency around this. I think it's essential that we get consistency around this, and I think it's essential that we mobilize an entire industry that is going to be installing different types of equipment, maintaining different types of equipment, and financing different types of equipment going forward. So I think that's the challenge. Capacity building would be my main comment to make. So, Michael, back to you.
Well, thank you, panelists. Let's start with the first question for Christina. Christina, in short, how do you see the future of the city? What contribution is the city going to make to combat and adapt to climate change? So over to you.
Yes, so in particular, the City of London is quite ambitious, more ambitious even than London commitments, and of course, much more ambitious than national governments. So this sort of leadership is critical because it will show the way for others to take meaningful climate action. So the city, the key elements is for it to be inclusive, just, that it also delivers the highest quality of infrastructure possible. Of course, addressing all the topical, let's say, technical things we've been saying, energy efficiency, facilitating the clean energy transition. But of course, that it also maybe possibly through culture, heritage, inspire people to do better, protect nature, and why not bring back more green into the city. So it's a city that is embracive, that is open to all sorts of trades, but also that puts forward higher quality of life. And for that, the technical, let's say, decarbonization aspect is critical, but also embracing circular economy and health and well-being, which we know after this pandemic is so essential.
Thank you. Avril, there's a lot of talk about decarbonizing, in particular, domestic and commercial for that matter, which is something like 40% of emissions combined. What's the role of electric heating? Is electric heating the answer?
It depends where you live. In the UK, electric heating cannot be the total answer, simply because of the infrastructure that we have. And in fact, it would be a waste of infrastructure if we did decide electric heating was the only answer. There is no silver bullet, let's be honest about this. And for some people, electric heating is a good solution. But given that in the UK, 84% of homes are gas heated, that's 23 million homes. And between now and 2050, there are only 10 million working in minutes, we're going to have to be converting houses at a hell of a pace if we're going to get everybody over to electric heating. Whether it's ground source or air source heat pumps, it's a major refit of your heating system. Conversely, the UK is remarkably well set up with a beautifully established infrastructure for gas. Gas at the moment, clearly a fossil fuel, but it's not the only gas in the world. My particular view is we should capitalise in the UK on this infrastructure of thousands of kilometres of gas pipes, beautifully lined with polyethylene, totally impermeable to hydrogen, and get hydrogen down our pipes into our boilers and into our hobs and cook and heat using hydrogen. That way we're making use of a very well established infrastructure and not requiring ourselves to completely rebuild the national grid to transfer the levels of power that would be required if we did go over to wholesale electric heating in the UK. Other countries are different. The UK is set up ideally to capitalise on hydrogen, and without it, I think we're actually digging ourselves into a rather awful hole.
Well, thank you, Avril. I myself am quite sympathetic to that argument, not least as it would move us into having a little bit more storage capacity at the same time. Meanwhile, Kevin, we're very curious about your thoughts on engaging young people. How are they fully engaged? I might point out Martin Big had an interesting point in the Q&A. Is it the duty of livery company trusts when supporting young people to ensure that encouraging sustainable development is part of that support?
Yeah, but that's it's the most important question, I think, Michael. I mean, yeah, for instance, I left school at 15 to be a pipe fitter. I was an apprentice. I think we need more apprenticeship programs. I think we've got to really invest in apprenticeship programs. If we think about our livery companies, I mean, we have 40,000 liverymen in the city of London. I mean, we have such a huge footprint of influence. And I think if we go back into our livery companies and we go back into our private organizations or public institutions, wherever we come from, I think influencing how we approach the education and re-education. I think we're going to be retraining people as well as encouraging young people into the system. But I'd like to put the challenge out there for all livery companies to sort of get more engaged in youth and youth education and bring them into this conversation. I think they're with solutions. And I think each livery company should, and many companies do already create that bridge to the youth.
And Martin, you know, particularly, I mean, Canary Wharf's in an interesting position. You control your estate in a way that few others do, except arguably perhaps almost the city itself. What opportunities do you see to bring forward technologies and innovations? You know, what's the positive side of climate change technology?
Yeah, I mean, it's a brilliant point, and I'm kind of going to expand on what I said in the introduction. I think the built environment has this massive opportunity. It's something that we all connect with, and you know, I can't respond to that without mentioning the last sort of 18 months, which is seeing the world in the grip of this global pandemic. And for all its ills, it has had the effect of galvanizing our resilience and heighten our understanding that, you know, when it comes to global challenges, we literally do stand as one. And I think the pandemic has actually started to help us reforge our relationship with the built environment. You know, people are starting to realize more and more the effects that place can have on their health and well-being. And I think with climate, I think if we bring the two together, you know, not only will we see changes, positive changes to the built environment, but we'll see positive changes to the ecosystems. You know, natural solutions are usually good, not just for biodiversity, but they're also good for people too. And coming back to the climate, to tackle climate change, we all need to take climate action. And this is where we kind of recognize at Canary Wharf that our customers, our communities, and our people are demanding more and more from us as a responsible business and as a place. And that's the same for City of London. That's the same for all of our urban environments all around the world. So when you look at it holistically, we actually can see that we really all do want the same thing. We believe that we've entered a place now where, you know, climate action, well-being and resource use, they're not just additional problems. They're going to be the reason that we're in business. And if we're not tackling them as cities and urban centres, then we're just not going to thrive. So coming back to your original question, Michael, opportunities do exist in many places, but I think we've got to we've got to see where they lie, and we've got to seize the opportunities. You know, technical. You know, Avril's talked about new forms of energy, perhaps new materials, new composites, new methods of construction. Economic, you know, clearly there's new business models to be explored here. We've talked about circular economy, and of course, just purely financial, green bonds, and the fact that we can use more higher performing environmental rated buildings and infrastructure. We can actually use them to raise green finance. Why can't that be explored more? Why can't that become the norm? And then I think coming back to the last point that obviously that Kevin touched on, the people element. We're all about livery companies. We're all about people. We're all about our skills and trades. Let's find ways to employ, you know, more diverse people with more diverse thinking and skills, developing new skills and new training to deploy these new technologies. You know, lots of people want to work in sustainability. Let's find ways to promote what we're doing through this whole climate agenda to really excite and involve people in sustainable careers, because you don't have to be a sustainability practitioner like myself. You know, you could be a plumber like Kevin or a fueler like Avril and still be involved in sustainability. And I think that's the area that really interests me the most, seeing how we can see the opportunity within our livery companies to actually promote mass involvement. And I think that's something that we should be thinking about.
Wow. Well, panelists, that's been really heartwarming in many ways. And speaking of warming, there are a tremendous number of comments in the chat room about hydrogen, green, blue, black, whatever. Where's it going to come from? Remote areas, dangers of hydrogen. Many of those questions can be answered, but it's great to see the livery engaging on it. And I think when Gordon and John are looking at expansion of the site, this might be an interesting area to provide a lot more detail on so that people are informed. But thank you, panelists, very much for all of that. I'm looking carefully here for Ian Beveridge out there, but I'm delighted that we should be having a special guest joining us. Is that correct, Ian?
Yes, indeed. Baroness Brown, if you'd like to turn on your camera and microphone, and you should join the presentation now.
Heartwarming thanks to our panelists. Thank you all. I'm delighted to say that we are fortunate, ladies and gentlemen, to have a special guest tonight here to talk to us about the challenges of preparing for the impact of climate change. It's Baroness Brown, Dame Julia King, who's going to speak to us this evening. As a reminder to many of you, but not news, I'm sure, Julia chairs the Climate Change Committee's Adaptation Committee and is chair of the Carbon Trust and the Henry Royce Institute for Advanced Materials. So there are a few better qualified to be speaking to us tonight. Baroness Brown, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I'm going to do something, attempt to share my screen. All it's sharing is, how mysterious, all it's sharing is...
I can share it on your behalf, Baroness Brown, if you would like.
Let me have one more go.
Of course.
No, I shall have to give up. All it will share is, despite the fact I have a PowerPoint open, all it will share is what we can currently see. So, very much. I want to talk to you about the scale of the challenge we have ahead. If I could have the next. So, global temperature rise, like if we manage to meet agreement goals. So that means the last 10 years have been the hottest 10 years on record. Every 10 years to 2050, about the time we reach net zero globally, every 10 years will be the hottest 10 years on record. So the alarming things that we've seen this year will become rather more commonplace. And we don't really start to slow things down until we get to 2050. So just as a, and if we don't meet the Paris goals, next slide, please. Then this is what the future could look like. So in terms of the policies that governments have in place, not the commitments they've made, but the policies they have in place globally, we could still be on a path to somewhere above 4 degrees of warming by the end of the century. So we, in 2 weeks' time, the discussions at COP are really crucial. But even if they are successful, and we all hope they will be, we need to remember we still have a lot of warming to come. Next slide, please. And this year has shown us what that will mean a lot more of. So the appalling flooding, killing more than 200 people earlier this year. The ice in London, the surface water flooding. The appalling flooding in New York, again with significant deaths. The 50 degrees centigrade temperatures in Canada. The wildfires in all parts of the world. The wildfire season in California, which is now twice as long as it used to be in the 1970s. Drought in many parts of the world, and possibly even coming to parts of the UK. So that's what it's like when we've had the first of our hottest 10 years on record. We've got three more of those to come, and we'll unfortunately be seeing quite a lot more of this. Next slide, please. And of course, that's really beginning to impact economically. This is some data about natural loss events, and the hydrological, the climatological, and the meteorological are all climate related. In the case of in the space of 4 decades, that's gone up from about $350 billion to about 1.5, approaching $1.5 trillion. And that's a trend that we're going to see continuing for a number of years. Next slide, please. And of course, we've seen some pretty hot weather in the UK. We got up to almost 40 centigrade in Cambridge, my hometown, in July 2019. And down in the southeast of the UK, we've been seeing hottest daytime temperatures increasing at almost a degree per decade. So we will certainly be up to 40 by the time we get to 2050. Next slide, please. Likely to see growing water shortages, particularly actually in East Anglia and the southeast, some of the country's key food production areas. If we can manage to keep the temperature down to 2 degrees, it's a lot less painful than if we let it get anywhere near that 4 degrees. Next slide, please. And of course, it may seem odd to be talking about water shortage, but one of the impacts of climate change that we're seeing is drier summers and wetter winters. Recently, the 7 of the UK's wettest years on record, and even with the increased investment that the Environment Agency are going to be seeing, we can expect to see a significant additional number of people at risk of flooding by the mid-century. Next slide, please. So really just to say, we have quite a lot of climate change already baked in. We're probably going to get to an average temperature increase of about 1.7 to 1.8 degrees by mid-century. Even if we're on that Paris compliant path, we're probably going to overshoot the 1.5. Heat wave summers like 2018 will become a normal summer with a 50% chance every year. Average summer rainfall will fall by around 11%, with a possibility of it falling by as much as 24%. And average winter rainfall will increase but potentially as much as 16%. Heavy rainfall, so relatively short bursts of extremely intense rainfall that cause surface water flooding particularly, will become more frequent, and the sea level will continue to rise, giving real problems for people at the coast. So that inevitable change by mid-century is what we've pretty much got already baked in. So it's absolutely crucial that we reduce our emissions and don't make things any worse than they are going to be. And this is where we start. The UK's emissions by sector in 2019. The red line you can see is the power system. And since we've started taking coal off the system, we've seen emissions from the power system dropping very fast indeed. This is, of course, pre-COVID data. COVID, of course, makes it complicated, but this is a good way of looking at the trends to look at the pre-COVID data. Industry has been decarbonising steadily, but not yet at a rate that's going to get us down to net zero, remembering that that's where we're now heading. We have two real problems at the moment in terms of the central blue line, which is transport, surface transport, and the fairly central orange line, which is buildings, which you've just been talking about. So those are two areas where we really have got to turn those very to emissions. We've got to get those lines turning rapidly down towards zero over the next 30 years. And we have some good plans for transport, but we don't yet have for buildings. We were expecting them to be announced today in the government's net zero strategy and the home strategy, but those have been delayed till later this week because of the death of the MP, Sir David Amess, on Friday. To get our emissions down, we need to focus very strongly on 4 key areas. The top one of those is the real no-brainer one, which is the purple one, which is improved efficiency and demand reduction. The big area in the middle, the orange and yellow and red, is the implementation of low carbon solutions. And a huge part of that is electrification. And a small contribution to that is hydrogen. The blue part of that is the expansion of our low carbon energy system. So our things like offshore wind and renewables and potentially nuclear to produce electricity. And then we have some remaining emissions we need to offset, hopefully using emissions primarily, but to some extent by 2050 be needing to use air capture and carbon capture and storage and other engineered removals of that sort. Next slide, please. Under are some really dramatic changes in our electricity system. So underpinning that and all of that electrification is something like something more than a doubling by 2050. So from about 300 terawatt hours per year to something of the order of 720 terawatt in the Climate Change Committee's core scenarios. So that's a huge growth in electricity use. That's an enormous growth in things like our offshore wind generating capacity from about 10 gigawatts of offshore wind today to something closer to 100. A significant growth in solar, potentially in nuclear, but a really our electricity system to be achieved over the next 30 years. Next slide, please. Accompanying that is a dramatic reduction in our use of fossil fuels. So here's natural gas over 1,000, just under 1,000 terawatt hours per year at the moment, coming down to something like 200, and that then being mainly used producing hydrogen and for generating electricity with carbon capture and storage. Next slide, please. A similar picture for oil demand coming down from about 750 terawatt hours today to less than 100 terawatt hours. and that probably being mostly used still in aviation, particularly for long haul flight, very difficult to decarbonize, and that those emissions would then need to be offset to meet net zero. Next slide, please. And accompanying that, as you were talking earlier, a significant increase in our production of hydrogen. And if we're talking about green and blue hydrogen, not grey hydrogen, an increase in our from 0 to something over 200 terawatt hours per year. So something the size of our current, 2/3 of the size of our current electricity system in terms of provision of energy into our system. But I'm going to, can we go back to the previous slide, please? But I'm going to disagree with Avril in terms of where we're going to use that. Hydrogen is going to be expensive. We're going to be using it in the really hard to decarbonize areas. That's mostly going to be and in industry. I think a small amount of it may be going into the heating system, but in our core climate change committee scenarios, that's probably not more than 10 or 11% of buildings in the UK being heated by hydrogen. The implications of simply switching out gas with hydrogen are actually that we would need an electricity system that was 4 times the size of what we have today to produce it by electrolysis, or we would need to vastly increase our imports of methane if we would produce it as blue hydrogen by reformation of methane. So I think it will make probably a modest contribution to decarbonizing heating, not a large one. Next slide, please. And just to emphasize how dramatic that change is, today we use in total approximately 2,000 terawatt hours of energy, 300 terawatt hours are electricity. So we're about 15% electric. In 2050, much more efficient because of the electrification. We will use somewhere around 1,000 terawatt hours, about half as much total of that. Around 700 terawatt hours are likely to be electricity. So we'll be a pretty much electric society, if you like. 70% or so of our total energy will come from electricity. So that's a really dramatic change. Could I have the next? So in the next 28 years, we've got a lot to do. We've got to more than double in size our electricity system. We've got to see a huge growth in renewable generation, particularly offshore wind. We've got to accommodate all of that intermittent, predictable, but intermittent generation into our electricity grid. Increase hydrogen production from the 27 terawatt hours of grey hydrogen we use today to an order of magnitude or so more. Carbon capture and storage industry. We've got, as you were talking about earlier, some 29 million existing buildings which need low carbon heat. We've got to see a huge growth in electric and other zero carbon vehicles and the charging points to support them. We've got to have a significant increase in our afforestation and woodland cover from the 10,000 or so hectares per year we're planting at the moment to something like 50,000 hectares per year, increasing the woodland and forest cover from about 14% to 18% of the UK area. And in order to make space for that, we're going to need changes to agriculture, including more efficient growing of crops and a reduction in beef and dairy in our diet. So it's an enormous amount of change that we need to deliver. We've seen change on this scale before, but not on all of those fronts at once. So this is really very challenging. And could we have the next slide, please? And as you've been saying, we need people to be engaged in the change. Look backwards at the emissions reductions we've seen from 2008 to 2019, the sort of 40% or so reduction. Most of that has come from new technology while decarbonising the power system primarily. So none of us have had to change our behaviours to deliver that. So some 80% or something of the emissions reduction has not really involved any of us in doing anything different. As we look forward for the next 30 years or so, 1% or so comes from new technologies that don't require us to do anything different, but about 60% relies on every person in the UK doing something different, making a different decision, buying a different kind of car, whatever it is. So people have to be much more engaged as we go. The comments you're making about education and engaging people are hugely important, but we have a big education program for the population as a whole. So it's getting tougher in terms of getting people really involved in this. Next slide, please. It's also an interesting challenge in terms of investment. The top half of this graph is the investment needed for this transformation. The bottom half is the negative part, is the saving we can expect to see. And as you can see, for the next 15 years or so, the capital investment is significantly more than the operational savings. And you can also see 2050, the operational savings are becoming possibly even bigger than the capital. The operational savings fall remarkably in a single area of transport. And so that's a challenge for government in order to put in place a tax system that if you like, redistributes the benefits from transport in order to support the investments we need to make across the board. Next slide, please. So what can livery companies do? Well, first of all, it would be great for you all to resilient net zero operations. And I heard somebody talking about the challenges of listed buildings. And it is indeed a challenge. I live in a listed building, but actually brilliant work on that at the National Trust. And I would encourage you to talk to them. Livery companies do a lot of entertaining and have brilliant dinners from experience. So I think the food that you're serving, thinking about how do you meet these requirements to reduce the meat and dairy? How do you make sure you're using local produce? How do you focus, reuse, repair, and recycle so that we reduce waste? We need to think about our water use, because if we can reduce our water use, we very, very significantly can reduce the potential for future drought. And of course, we can move zero. Many livery companies are lucky enough to have investments, of course. Where are your funds invested that you're able to fund your charity? Make sure that they're invested in companies who've got their science-based targets and are hitting zero. You do a lot of work in the educational sphere, and there's a real opportunity in your work with schools, and I'll say a couple of more words about data, but of course also thinking about how your awards can reflect the people moving to a low carbon, zero carbon pathway. And of course you have conferences and education activities for your members. You are able to influence behavior in all sorts of relevant terms. And we've heard about plumbing, materials, instrument making, a whole lot of hugely relevant professionals, who are all going to be absolutely key to delivering net zero. So I think you have an enormously important role to play, from what you do to who you can influence. And my final slide, please. Just I would encourage you to join the Climate Change Educational Partnership. It's hosted by STEM Learning Limited. It's hosted on the stem.org website, which is the STEM Learning Limited website. The Met Office, the Royal Society, the Environment Agency, and it's about resources to support teachers and schools, and also STEM ambassadors going into schools with ensuring we can integrate climate change in an interesting and relevant way into the education of our young people. So thank you very much for listening, and inspiring conference.
Oh, Julia, thank you so much. I couldn't have asked for a more perfect presentation from you in terms of, you know, the big picture, but then absolutely bringing it down to how the livery companies can operate. And I hope we're going to hit all of those ideas and maybe more that come up with our guidance on our website. So thank you so much for raising our eyes and expectations to that wider society role that's really staring us in the face. And of course, we've got COP26 coming up just around the corner. We're going to be challenged to take some drastic steps. So even though ours are mainly sort of mini tippy toes, I think they're just as important. Derek Farrow said in the chat about, you know, inaction paralysis because there's too much to do. But I think he also agreed that we all need to start somewhere. And so that's how we'll be doing it now with all of our plans. So I'm really going to be summing up how what we've been talking about over the last hour or so. There's a huge number of people to thank, more than I can possibly name individually. But let me start with all of the presenters, including you, Julia, and for all of the people that have actually put this actual seminar on. And of course, our MC, Alderman Professor Michael, shown his considerable scientific, professorial, and historically green and environmental standards to this talk. So thank you very much indeed, Michael. There is a list of supporters on the website. I can't repeat all their names, but maybe just to mention those who have actually helped get the website together: our webmaster, Rob Flavin, and particularly our lead constructor, Paul Singh, who's been working very, very hard. We've had topic leads who some of them have been speaking today: Gordon Masterton, John Pike, Robert Hughes Penny and Liz Field on the investment side, Heather Barrett-Mould and Avril MacDonald. And Edwina and Liz have also been mentioned. But behind that, there's a whole raft of people who drafted all of the guidance notes and worked very hard. So thank you to all of you. Thanks to the livery companies who have already effectively signed up. They've contributed financially and in kind. There are 13 of them, so it's really great to have them there. And clearly my call out now is to everybody to say, please, can you think about joining as well as a livery company? Our sponsors tonight have been UK CRIC, this is the United Kingdom Collaboratorium for Research on Infrastructure and Cities. They've sponsored the event, so thank you so much for that financial contribution. But more than that, they've looked at all our documents, they've verified them. We know they're credible, they fact-checked them for us. So thank you very much indeed, UCRIC. And can I turn to all of you who've stayed the course? It's brilliant that you've stayed and listened and participated, and certainly my breakout group was really fascinating, with a young liveryman, a young freeman, sorry, and also a master, both of them helping each other as to how they can work on issues. This is a chance for you to be part of it. As I've said before, there's a button when you go back to the networking page to stay in touch, but we will be in touch with you anyway because you've signed up. And there's no joining fee, there's no qualification. It's just, are you interested? Do you want to hear more? Or maybe can you contribute more? And I hope you'll also all be individually catalysts for the livery companies. I'm going to be sending out an email in the next couple of days to the clerks to say to them that this program is now up and running. The website is here. And we'd like livery companies also to join. Again, no fee, no real commitment, but just a pledge that you actually want to be involved in some way, a commitment that you're going to join and to look further into this. And let's hope in due course, as some people have already said, you'll be writing an action plan as to how your livery company can make a difference with all of those things that Julia listed as really good possibilities to be involved in. Now, this was all started off because the City Corporation published our climate action strategy. That was live in April of this year. They've just actually issued their 6-month catch-up, and the City Corporation is online with its pledges that it's already made to have its own direct emissions net zero by 2027, and by Scope 3 and all its wider emissions by 2040, and has today issued its pledge around investments and its commitment to the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. So the City Corporation is really moving positively, as are many businesses in the square mile. And I know the liveries also want to take up that challenge. We've got some 40,000 members. So we've got a great spread across lots of businesses, lots of organisations, across lots of parts of the UK and worldwide. We've got links to so many schools, affiliations, militaries, and businesses, trades, crafts and professions. What a fantastic multiplier, that is, for us all to do our bit, which I know will build and build so that it will be a big bit. So what I'd like to just conclude by saying is really, let's get to it, let's sign up and let's move forward on this. So I am bringing together the close of the formal part of the evening, but this platform is staying live. So please, even though the presentations will end, you're very welcome to stay on the networking rooms. They will still be there and you'll be moved back to that. Please have a look around, talk to other people, share some ideas. We want to hear from you. Keep the chat, which has been brilliant. It's been popping in my ear throughout. I know people have got lots of things to say. So thank you all for attending tonight. Thank you all for your interest and have a good evening and enjoy the networking rooms. Thank you.